So I think that we are live. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much for joining our webinar, which will be focusing on gender-based violence and femicide and disability. My name is Maud Maudi Swartz, and I am the GBVF Grants Officer for Soul City Institute for Social Justice. So thank you again for joining us as we embark in this crucial conversation that is themed around gender-based violence and disability, highlighting the right to inclusion, protection, access, and justice. So people with disabilities are more likely to be the victims of violence and abuse, and they may also face additional obstacles while attempting to gain access to assistance and services. They are more likely to face barriers when trying to report or seek assistance for gender-based violence, which can also have a disproportionate impact on these individuals. There is a pressing need for increased understanding on the ways in which gender-based violence and disability overlap, as well as for support services that are more inclusive and easily accessible. A strong network of allies is essential to ensuring that persons with disabilities may live their lives free from threat of any form of abuse. This involves making sure that their views are heard and that they have the same opportunities as everyone else to support and to obtain support and justice. And also included in this is making sure that their voices are heard in all spaces. So today we are joined by our esteemed panelists who are doing incredible work around this topic that we will be, breaking down in our session today. So we have panelists from the KZN Deaf Association. We have Dale Skonewolf, who is the director, and Upasna Rambili, who is the senior social worker for the organization. And they will be representing KZNDA, which is a nonprofit organization, which is a one-stop center with over 20 years experience in serving the deaf community of KwaZulu-Natal province. And KwaZulu-Natal Deaf Association projects promote inclusivity, accessibility for the deaf community through various programs such as life skills, workshops, skills development training. And KZNDA capacitates and empowers the deaf people by providing knowledge and skills which enable the community to participate in their self-governance and live independently, which is their philosophy. And broadly, their philosophy also speaks to deaf teach the deaf, which is, I think, very powerful. And we will also be joined by Sanele Ngwane, who is the deaf facilitator for KZNDA. And he will tell us more about the approaches that they use on the ground and the challenges that they see when engaging with the community. And also we are joined by Petri Dutoy and Sandile Mgadi, who will be our interpreters for the session. In our esteemed panelists, we are also joined by Dimakatso Molusi, who is the founder and chairperson of Bahamutibi LGBTIQA+ organization, which is an organization formed by Seking queer members and are fighting for the rights and beliefs of local queer persons in the Mutibi village, which is and surrounding areas, which is in the Northwest province. And they are specifically focusing on Greater Taung as a whole. The Bahamutibi organization advocates for the rights of other marginalized and vulnerable community members, including people living with disabilities. And the director will tell us more about a specific gender-based violence case, which they are currently supporting in court, and they are monitoring this case. So just to highlight, KZN Deaf Association and Bagamu TV are two of the 25 community-based organizations that Soul City Institute is an intermediary of for the Gender-Based Violence Response and Femicide Response Fund 1, which focuses on Pillar 2 and 3 of the Gender-Based Violence and Femicide National Strategic Plan. And this looks at specifically prevention and rebuilding social cohesion, and Pillar 3 focuses on justice, safety, and protection. So in our esteemed panelists, I told you that we have a very broad panelist, and it looks at different people who are working in different spaces around this issue. We also have Tato Mputi, who is a disability justice advocate, a sexual health enthusiast, the founding director at Enabled Enlightenment, and Tato is also the Male Guardian Guiding Woman for 2022. On the panelists, we also have Nosintu Mkimeli, who is the founder of the Abanembongo Persons with Disability Organization in Kamakwe, activist in Kamako, which is in the Eastern Cape, and is an activist of the Total Shutdown movement in Eastern Cape. And Nosintu is also a climate crisis activist, so a very well-rounded panelist there too. So just to touch again, our discussion will focus on the inclusion, protection, access, and justice for all people with disabilities. The gender-based violence and disability, we will be looking at specifically the right that the community has to inclusion, as mentioned, protection, and the access to justice. And this discussion aims to promote the inclusion of all community members, especially this specific community, and in particular focus to women and girls with disabilities. The project this discussion will also work to raise awareness on the rights of people with disabilities, as we are within Disability Awareness Month, and to promote that they are included in all spaces. And this is intentional inclusion and all aspects of lives. We will also work to support the development of inclusion in policies, in practices, and building the capacity of individuals and organizations to support the inclusion and protection of the community that we are highlighting today. And we hope that this session is going to bring insight on this topic and the issues that are faced by the community that we'll be looking at today. So as we kick off our session, and just to set the foundation for our conversation, we will move to our first panelist, who is Upasna Rambili, the Senior Social Worker for KZN Deaf Association, who will tell us more about what disability is and who are people with disabilities. And also touching on that, Upasna, could you kindly just also let us know about the work that KZN DA does? And I think that with that being said, I'll hand over to you and the KZN team. Thank you. Hi, Upasna. I think that you're on mute.
That's my problem. Sorry.
That's okay. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for this opportunity, Soul City. Maud has already introduced me. My name is Upasna Rambali. I'm a senior social worker. I'm very passionate about the work that I do with the deaf sector. And Sanele will reintroduce us later and tell you our sign names.
We can do it now.
Should we do that now? Okay, let's do that now. Sanele, maybe you can just tell everybody our sign names.
Good morning, colleagues. It's so nice to see all of you today. My name is Sanele Ngwane, and this is how the deaf community refers to me, Sanele. And this is Upasna, part of my team, and also on my right-hand side is Dave. Awesome. I work with the KwaZulu-Natal Deaf Association as a South African Sign Language facilitator. It is something very close to my heart, and I really feel that we make a difference to the community in South Africa.
Thank you so much, Sanele. So that's just a little bit of awareness about something unique to deaf culture, is that you assigned a sign name based on something unique about your features, your characteristics. So when deaf people become accustomed to spending time with you, you assigned a sign name, and that's basically the name that the deaf world knows you by. You can't choose it, you can't change it. And my sign name is Upasna because this is you in the manual alphabet A to Z. This is you.
Upasna like that, yes.
My name starts with U, and I wear a nose ring. So that's how I'm identified as Upasna. Okay, great. Okay, so I'm going to answer the questions that were posed to me, but obviously my responses are going to be a little bit skewed because I'm going to focus mainly on the deaf sector. So the first question and the second do overlap to some extent. What is disability and who are persons with disabilities? So I didn't want to present to you something that you can just Google, and I wanted to share some of my own personal experience as well. So as you all might know, South Africa is a signatory to the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability. But interestingly enough, the convention doesn't actually have a specific definition of disability. What it does say in the preamble is that disability is an evolving concept, and it does result from the interactions between persons with impairments and attitudinal and environmental. And that for me is critically important. So under purpose, it says that persons with disabilities includes those who have long-term physical, mental, intellectual, or sensory impairments, which in interaction with various barriers may hinder their full and effective participation in society on an equal basis with others. So some of the important points to consider there is that it actually shifts the focus away from the impairment that the person has. Some deaf people, interestingly enough, don't consider themselves to actually belong to the disability sector. They've actually told us that the difference between us as hearing people and deaf people, the only difference is that they cannot hear, and they compensate for that by having a language. And the onus on where the disability actually falls is on our side if we don't engage with them in the language that they have. So that's quite a radical thought process, something to ponder, especially as we are hopeful that sign language will be the next official language in this country. So who are persons with disabilities? Disability is such a broad concept, and I think we can't just put it under one sort of category. So just to help me unpack it further, there are several types of disabilities. Deafness is just one of those types. There are people who have specific disabilities, and there are people who have multiple disabilities. There are varying levels of disability. So within the deaf sector, you might have somebody who's profoundly deaf, and and then on the other end of the continuum, you might have somebody who has a very mild hearing loss. So each type of disability faces their own challenges. With the deaf sector, mainly the challenges are around communication and the barriers we face, because without denial, we live in a hearing world. So that becomes a challenge. Remember, people are unique, whether you have a disability or not. And as such, people with disabilities face their own individual and unique challenges. The challenges faced really are dependent on so many issues, including and not limited to their levels of literacy, the acceptance of the disability, the access to health, as well as their socioeconomic status. So some key points to note is, on a positive note, is that disability is no longer viewed only as a medical model. It's no longer viewed as a deviancy from the norm. It's now rather, we're shifting the focus to a social model. So we're moving away from the person to the actual environmental and attitudinal barriers. The focus from moving away from the person means that the inequality is actually seen as stemming from the community, stemming from the services, based on these negative attitudes, the stereotypes. So the negative attitudes, the community, the services are in essence therefore not accessible and not inclusive of people with disabilities. And as a result, this places limitations on the person. We also allude to the human rights approach, which says that disability is based on the principles of human rights. It recognizes largely that disability is a natural part of human diversity and therefore should be respected and supported in all its various forms. In essence, it just means simply people with disabilities have the same rights as everyone else in society and should be treated accordingly. So we have this amazing constitution, and what it actually does is it also protects the rights of persons with disabilities, while it also promotes the equalization of opportunities and promotes the integration of persons with disabilities in society. However, sometimes we know what's on paper doesn't translate to what happens on the ground, but we are chipping away at that block slowly, step by step. Some advice from me. If you are unsure, always see the person before the disability. Always focus on the person and their abilities, not just their disability. Don't feel anxious about terminology. Just like the definition in the United Nations Convention, terminology evolves and changes. Don't assume that if you know what the person's disability is, that you then know what is best for them and what their needs are. Rather, engage with them, ask them to actually tell you what their individual needs are. Don't be intimidated, approach somebody, speak to them. If you are unsure, approach them, always show respect and kindness, and I can assure you, you're on the right path. Okay, the last question I was asked to answer was KZNDA services. And again, I've tweaked it a little bit. I'm going to answer that question related to GBV. So our proposal to Soul City is also talking to pillars 2 and 3, and our programs go as follows. So under pillar 2, prevention, we focus a lot on the life skills. And here, some of the topics we've covered are based a lot on the needs assessment that we do with the deaf sector. So some of the topics we've covered this year, which were quite interesting, was gender-based violence, protection orders, the Constitution and your rights, tools to thrive, dealing with anxiety and depression, just to mention a few. The activities under life skills. So KZNDA invites guests who are experts in their respective fields, and we invite them to then address the deaf attendees on a range of GBF-related topics. We also ensure that an interpreter or interpreters are booked to facilitate communication between our hearing guests and our deaf attendees. The attendees are then also engaged with the presenters in order to share their own personal experiences and challenges firsthand. At the culmination of these presentations, we ensure there's an opportunity for the deaf attendees to ask their questions, make recommendations to help fill in any gaps. Some of the outputs in the life skills is that the deaf attendees are then empowered as they gain information and become aware of a range of topics as well as services that then they can access. The presenters that come to us become more aware of the needs of the deaf community and also possible gaps in service delivery. By engaging with deaf attendees, the presenters also become more sensitized to the needs of the deaf community. Through these platforms, deaf attendees are also then playing an active role in both self-representation and advocacy. Capacitation. Some of the examples of the capacitation and skills training that we've had is gender-based violence. We've covered femicide, who the relevant stakeholders are, and their roles. Okay, the program basically, KZNDA invites guests again who are experts in their field to now train deaf attendees and share relevant information. For example, our last session, we had somebody from the family court who actually sat down and explained the protocols in terms of applying for protection order and actually went through the form with them. The deaf leaders that are trained are deaf facilitators and teacher assistants who we target for the training. This training allows KZNDA to also expand our reach in the deaf community. The trainees are offered training on a range of GBF-related topics, and KZNDA ensures that communication is facilitated as interpreters are booked for the sessions. the trainees engage with the presenters, share challenges that they experience at their level, at schools for the deaf, etc. We also ensure that the deaf trainees complete a pre and post-test questionnaire to make sure that there is a shift in learning. And at the culmination, they complete an evaluation form where they also have an opportunity to give suggestions and recommendations. So our deaf attendees, then the outputs are the deaf attendees gain relevant skills and the know-how so that they are able to do the following. They're able to function more independently. They are equipped with information and skills that they can share with other deaf people. And they're also on the ground so that they can assist any identified deaf victims, either at the school or in the community, and refer the relevant cases. So this way, again, they're playing an active role in their own advocacy and self-representation, which is a huge component of our work, is empowering deaf people to then play a role in their own self-representation. Okay, our third program, sorry, I seem to have been missing a page. Let me just grab my last one. Okay, the last program that we do is where we've actually been training the rapid response teams in basic sign language and skill and signs relevant to the GBF field. So so far we've trained 3 communities. We've covered Umlazi, Newlands, and Wentworth, and we work with community-based organizations where we cover a little bit of awareness on deaf culture, who the deaf community is, some communication tips, and then we do enough signs relevant to the GBF sector so that if these people that are working on the ground actually come into contact with a deaf victim or somebody trying to access service, they have enough signs to understand what it is the person needs, take down contact and identifying details, reassure the person that they are trying to help, at least be able to spell their names to them, and allay some of those fears, and then make the appropriate referral. So that in essence is what we do related to GBF. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Upasna. And I think that, the one thing that you mentioned is the fact of self-realization. And it is the perspective in terms of the language was very interesting. And I do think that to reflect our constitution and to reflect the rights within Section 9, it is paramount that sign language becomes an officiated language. And that way it could also be accessible within schools, eventually being another language that could be, a language that people can learn in schools. So thank you for that. And also, it's great that you put the community first, and that reflects in the work that you do. And you are really, really living and demonstrating the philosophy that KZNDA has. So you touched on the pillars that you're working with in terms of the GBVF NSP, and I think we're going to move over to Dale, who is the director of KZNDA, and who's going to, I think, Dale, if you could just speak more on, why is it important to include people with disabilities in GBVF prevention and response efforts? And could you also touch on the plans in the Gender-Based Violence and Femicide National Strategic Plan? And as persons with disabilities are identified as one of the populations who are most affected, and also, if you could also touch on the barriers that KZNDA faces as an organization. And I know your partner has mentioned the type of ways that community members can support and be allies. But if you could also look at touch on that point in terms of the activities of the National Strategic Plan. So over to you, Dale.
Thank you so much, Maud. And just to explain that my sign name is Dale because my surname is Wolf. When I was first given my sign name, I thought, okay, I know I have a long, big nose, but that is very rude. And then they explained to me that Wolf is Pretty Wolf, Shona Wolf. So that has been my sign name for the past 30 odd years that I've been working with the deaf community. Okay, Maud, you said one of the target questions posed is the importance of including persons with disability in the National Strategic Plan. So disability actually is impacted across all the pillars 1 through to 6. So it's accountability, coordination, and leadership. It is the prevention and rebuilding, cohesion, it's justice, safety, protection. It is the response, the care, the support, and the healing process in pillar 4, and the economic power, and then research and information management. I'm going to tweak it a bit because I think in order to look at barriers faced by NGOs such as ourselves and CBOs working within the field of disability, we need to look at the recommendation, the barriers first, and then the recommendations made at a district, provincial, and national level. So prior to the national summit, KZN engaged within KZN, they engaged in district consultations, and then we had a provincial summit, and then we went on to the national summit. And how the national and how government can actually accelerate the NSP on GBV and hold not only themselves, but all stakeholders accountable. So in order to look at the barriers, it's important to also know that people with disabilities and other vulnerable groups face secondary victimization and abuse due to the challenges of access, lack of information, lack of awareness, lack of resources, and the breakdown in communication. One of the barriers is, I think that all of us face, is funding. Okay, the absence, and we've noticed that came up at district, provincial, and national level, that the absence of leadership and political will and political support and accountability impacts resource allocation. And the question that was raised at all the levels was, what has the government done with the GBVF funding? That's besides the point. So the resolutions to that is to fast track and strengthen the National Council GBVF bill with clear guidance and operational plans to include the GBVF fund in legislation, and it must be a multi-sectoral approach to funding. So it's not only government, but all sectors, the business sector must also be included in the funding process for GBVF. The second barrier that's faced is awareness and prevention. At the summit, it was made very clear that there was a lack of understanding of the National Strategic Plan in general on the GBVF. Awareness on GBVF is inaccessible to persons with disability, and especially I'm talking about the deaf community, because information is not presented in a deaf-friendly way. Deaf people cannot access radio. They cannot watch TV unless there's subtitles or there's a person interpreting. So as a pastor said in our program, our Life Skills program, we facilitate that process of engaging with the deaf in terms of giving them information and knowledge that they require and that they need. Awareness, another important thing is awareness by government, all staff at government facilities on gender-based violence itself, okay, and on disability sensitization. So it is to strengthen the awareness of the National Strategic Plan. Information must be suited to the various populations, such as persons with disability, and in a language that they understand. Disability sensitization and gender-based violence and femicide sensitization is so relevant to frontline staff in government facilities and to community members at grassroots level, like we're working with the rapid response teams in the various communities. It's essential that they are sensitized to disability. We've been sensitizing them to deafness and to the deaf community and have been teaching them sign language. And the disability sensitization and gender-based violence and femicide, I think it should form one of the outcomes and recommendations at all levels leading up to the summit, was that it forms part of the curriculum at schools in the life skills training program. So that young boys and girls are aware and are sensitized to gender-based violence and femicide and to disability in general across all fields. This also applies then to training institutions and tertiary institutions and at police colleges as well. The other barrier that was identified was accessibility, and persons with disability cannot access resources. For example, police stations, the courts, the TCC centres, shelters, due to the challenges of communication, due to the challenges of is there accessibility in terms of ramps for wheelchairs? Is there information available in Braille? Are the protection orders accessible in terms of the language, bearing in mind that a deaf person's language is not a written language, it's a visual language. So is there a video presentation that is being shown that can show them the processes of how to apply for a protection order? Are there people at these facilities that understand and know sign language and can communicate with a deaf person? Because it puts them in a very vulnerable state if the report is not recorded correctly. So in terms of overcoming those, in terms of what the recommendations put forward at the summit was, and this was actually so important, I was very impressed, is that sign language must be offered and be accessible to frontline staff. And one of our suggestions as well that we put forward was sign language needs to be a subject choice at schools, at all schools, training colleges and tertiary institutions. And I think it should be mandatory for the helping professions from first year right to completion of your degree, your training, or whatever you are doing in terms of nursing staff, psychologists, doctors, police officers, occupational therapists, community development workers, etc. Is disability sensitization and deaf sensitization on basic sign language training workshops at grassroots level, which Pastor touched on, with community-based organizations, the rapid response teams, and frontline workers in all government facilities. And we are trying to negotiate through the Office of the Premier in KZN that all frontline staff at government facilities are trained in sign language, deaf sensitization, and especially it'll be suited. So for example, if we're doing health, the signs will be specific to health and GBVF. If it's the police, it'll be signs specific to the reporting procedures of the criminal justice system, the court procedures, etc. And I think the ultimate long-term goal would also be them to employ qualified and accredited court interpreters, okay? And this is not just interpreters in terms of deaf communication, but often there's a lack of interpreters in all the other mother tongues of South Africa. So that the court processes are often delayed because the interpreter is not qualified to actually interpret what is actually being said, or they are not reflecting the true incident of what happened. Okay, and then also to have a database of qualified and recognized and accredited interpreters that people can access. In terms of response, is another barrier which was highlighted at all levels leading up to the summit. And that is the reporting of cases is a huge problem with persons with disability, but it's a huge problem generally across all sectors of society. The response is inadequate due to staffing problems, inadequate numbers of police stations, TCC centres, shelters, etc. And protection orders need to be in all languages, which is easily understood by people reporting cases. And the resolutions to that and the recommendations put forward was to strengthen the capacity of the criminal justice system and to utilize community policing forums and rapid response teams within the local communities. But there is a dire need to actually increase the rapid response teams in at district level in all communities as well. The monitoring and tracking of cases is very important. And one of the recommendations, which is a long-term goal, is to actually employ persons with disabilities at these facilities, at all government facilities. I mean, for example, if you're employing a deaf person and they're at a police station, a deaf person coming to report a case, doesn't have to work through an interpreter, which breaks down the confidentiality of their whole case. Somebody is there to actually talk to them in their mother tongue, which is sign language. But also what came out very strongly is to actually employ survivors of gender-based violence and femicide, because it's only people that have experienced this that can actually truly do desensitization on GBVF, and that would be really ideal in all the facilities, is to actually employ, and that will overcome the economic problems that women face as well, in terms of the next item, which was gender inequality, which was another barrier faced, where you need to have programs that empower women and assist in funding interventions, employment of women. And it was just an interesting statistic. I was at the debriefing of, and the KZN Provincial Summit, KZN Provincial GBV effort met to look at what took place at the summit, to look at how our recommendations correlated with the national, and to put forward another report and further recommendations. And it is interesting fact that during COVID and the riots, of the 3 million people in KZN who lost their jobs, 2 million of them were women, which is a very interesting fact. Yesterday, it was quite interesting because we had representation from the Office of the Premier, we had representation from eThekwini Municipality, and the eThekwini Municipality has committed to include civil society in the district development models, and they're putting forward a recommendation that as a province, this takes place at all district level. To also look at policy change in terms of, for example, I think if it's written in policy, you have to adhere to it. So it'll be GBVF sensitization. For example, with the Department of Labour, in employment contracts, it should be included in that. Sensitization, disability sensitization, GBVF sensitization should be included in the policy frameworks, where it's very difficult then not to adhere to what you are signing. I think in a nutshell, that was what my experiences were, and I'm happy to answer any questions, but I tried to link what you were asking, not just to the deaf sector, but to disability in general, and to the barriers that were identified and the recommendations that came out of the summits at local, at district, provincial, and national level. Thanks, Maud.
Thank you so much, Dale. And it's also great to hear about the recommendations and also the advocacy that you're playing and the role that KZNDA is playing within this, in representation of persons living with disability as a whole, and specifically to people of the deaf community. I think that the greatest thing that you mentioned also touched on the approach of nothing for us without us. So the community has to be included within this approach. They have to be employed. That also counts within their right to employment. And also without these services being, without access, this is definitely a deprivation of human rights. And you also touched on the challenges in terms of resources, which I think that that definitely needs to be addressed, and it needs to be addressed promptly to ensure that we're moving in a progressive approach of accessibility, and that would also be a reflection of inclusivity as a whole in terms of fighting or combating GBVF. So thank you so much for those reflections. And before we move over to Sanele, who would be telling us more about the work on the ground and the workshops that you're facilitating, I'd like to go into the chat, the comment section, and I'd like to also encourage our viewers to please pose a question or comment about the reflections and the discussions that we are having right now. I see that Dale spoke and your partner spoke about the access to to sign language in school. And a comment from Nerissa states that, they really wish that they did have signing in school. And I think that there is a need for it, and there should be progressive, intentional processes to ensure that that this does take place and this does happen. And Leonora mentioned in the comments that lots of disabled people in rural communities are not near clinics as well, and that also is a barrier within access to service, access to healthcare, access to human rights in general. So I think that we should get into that approach of seeing how we can really really push that pillar on accountability to ensure that those recommendations are pushed forward and we do get some progress in terms of that. So thank you so much, Dale. And now we will be moving to Sanele, and Sanele will be talking more about the work that is happening directly in the community, in the workshops that he facilitates, and the unique experiences that people with disabilities, in specific the deaf community, face in terms of gender-based violence, and also the barriers in accessing support. I know that Dale and your partner have touched on this. Sanela would give us a perspective from the ground and what comes out of the sessions that he's having with the community, and also how we can raise awareness. And also, yes, Dale and your partner have touched on this, but I think the perspective from the ground would be something that I think it would be great to hear what the insights from there. So Sanele, thank you, and over to you.
Okay, we're just waiting for the voiceover to come. Thank you. Okay.
Hi. Good morning, everyone. I would like to introduce myself again. My name is Sanele. This is how deaf people refer to me as. The name sign was given to me at a very young age when I was still a chubby baby. I grew up, but my name sign remained. So, if you are given a name sign, your sign sticks to you. Like an ID book. You're not going to change your ID book. You're not allowed to. And that is how the deaf community operates. I am not born deaf. I was born hearing and lost my hearing at the age of 11 through a sports accident. I was doing karate and I damaged my neck. The following morning when I woke up, the doctor diagnosed me as deaf. It was heartbreaking because suddenly I lived in an isolated world. I never met with other deaf people. My mother took the responsibility for finding a school for the deaf. And when she eventually found one and I entered the school, I saw people using their hands to communicate. Suddenly I realized that deafness is not the end of the world. So I completed my schooling in 2007, went to UNISA, where I studied psychology. Unfortunately, I dropped out after a year due to not having an interpreter and due to the inaccessibility of tertiary education in our country. I then became a sign language facilitator, of which I am very experienced in, and venturing into the GBV area to answer the question. I really enjoy facilitating access among hearing people to victims of GBV and teaching the frontline workers sign language. Now, my experience is that people are very excited to acquire language. That I normally ask them, have you ever encountered deaf people? And they always say to me that they encounter deaf people. But I can really see towards the end of my workshops with the rapid response teams, how their confidence in expressing themselves in a gestural and visual language increases for them to actually communicate with the deaf community. So Upasana and Dale have facilitated the training for me to go and teach sign language to 3 communities, rapid response teams. So I would like to leave you with 3 do's and 3 don'ts when you meet a deaf person, right? So let's start with the do's. When you meet a deaf person and you want to get their attention, gently tap them on the shoulder. Okay, that's number 1. Number 2, make sure that you maintain eye contact. Deaf people communicate with their eyes. And the moment you break eye contact, you break the communication. Some people also read lips, so it's very important to maintain that contact. If you want to get a deaf person's attention standing far, wave in the air and they're sure to respond. Now that brings me to the do's. When you get the attention of a deaf person, do not scream, do not shout, and do not tap invasively on various body parts. So when you communicate, also avoid chewing something like gum. It's very disorienting for a deaf person to follow the communication. And then thirdly, in the deaf community, we've got 3 different groups of diversity. We've got deaf with a capital D, similar like Jew, how you would refer to Jewish people or Afrikaans people or English people. Now that is spelled with a capital D. We identify as a linguistic minority group. We use South African Sign Language. We are capital D, deaf people. Then the second group is deafened people or people who lose their hearing later in life. And they normally communicate with lip reading. Now, there's also the hard of hearing, those people who experience some degree of hearing loss. Please avoid using the word hearing impaired. I'm not impaired. My hearing is not broken. There is nothing wrong with me physically, right? That's all. Upas, Dale, would you like to add something from your side?
I think you've said it in a nutshell. And thank you, Sanele. I just love to say that, just to reiterate, as we said, as a pastor said, we believe one of our philosophies is deaf teach the deaf and deaf also teach their own language. It's not possible for a hearing person to teach sign language. It has to come from the deaf person themselves. And every single one of our programs and our outputs and interventions are through communicating with deaf people at grassroots level as to their needs. And we believe in self-representation in terms of Sanele representing the deaf community. So as an organization, we will facilitate processes, but we encourage deaf people to become involved. And hence, as well, is the training that we do with deaf women to empower and capacitate them to actually become support structures within their own communities, within the schools that they teach, so that young girls and boys at schools for the deaf have access in a confidential environment to actually talk about any form of abuse that they've experienced, or if any family members are experiencing abuse and they need support and encouragement as well. So thank you, Sanele.
Thank you so much, Sanele, and thank you for also sharing your success story. And I've definitely learned so much today. Now I know the do's and the don'ts, and I will definitely carry that forward. And even teaching people who I come across about the do's and the don'ts. And I think that right now I am completely inspired to learn sign language, and I look forward to communicating with you in sign if we get a chance to meet. But thank you for sharing that success story, and also the incredible work and impact that you are having in the different task teams that you're engaging with, and also in the communities. I think your story is one to be shared, and it's a story that I think it would be great to use as a model, so that people can also know the barrier can also know that the type of barriers, because you've mentioned that you couldn't continue with your studies in the first year because there were no interpreters. So that is something that should be addressed, because I can only imagine that there's so many more people who are faced with the same barriers and challenges. So thank you so much to the team and the KZN DA team. I think that please do continue doing the incredible work that you are doing, and also encourage our viewers to continue to pose the questions. The team will still be here with us, and also we also encourage to people to share their experiences, and yeah, we will definitely reflect and keep on checking out the comment section. So
Sanele is an absolutely awesome facilitator. He leaves a trail of broken hearts. He has a lot of wide fan base, and he does such an amazing job because he just gives you the most unintimidating way to actually want to learn, and he inspires so many people. So we really have one of the best facilitators. And just another incidental thing is that because deaf people can't hear, and they or use their eyes to do what we use our ears to do. So this is how you clap for a deaf person. So that's the applause that we give in Sanele.
Definitely, Pamela. This is a massive applause, and thank you so much. And I am truly inspired, and I think that you, even our viewers, would definitely be inspired. So. With that being said, we will be moving to our next panelist, Dimakatso Molusi, and we will move into the direction of talking about justice and access to justice. So whilst gender-based violence affects women and girls, boys and men, so most survivors of gender-based violence are women and girls and members of the LGBTIQ plus community. So there are intersectionalities in terms of the marginalization of the two communities. So for women and girls with disabilities, the intersection of gender and disability increases their vulnerability to violence. There are many reasons why women, girls, and members of the LGBTI community are disproportionately affected by gender-based violence. For example, women and girls are more likely to experience intimate partner violence, sexual violence, and trafficking. So they are also more likely to experience multiple forms of violence, including physical, sexual, psychological, economic violence. And members of the LGBTIQ plus community are also at an increased rates of experiencing this. So there are intersectionalities between the two communities, and I think this is also particular in terms of transgender women and queer people of color. So Bagamoyo TV is an organization based in the Northwest, and they primarily focus on LGBTIQ plus rights. However, because of there's a limitation of organizations which support persons with disability, Bagamoyo TV has found themselves to be supporting a case, and this case affects a member of this, a community member a community member who is living with disabilities. Excuse me for that. And I think that their participation support in this case demonstrates the power of allyship, and that the fight against gender-based violence affects us all. So if we form alliances, we are more likely to succeed in advocating and fighting against it. So I think that I will move to Dimakatso right now, who could tell us more about this specific case that they're supporting, and also the observations that they've made in court, within support, within functionaries, and also what advice Bagamoyo TV can give to other organizations in building allyship to address gender-based violence and femicide, and also how to support victims and survivors regardless of the community and population that they belong to. So over to you, Dimakatso. Thank you.
Thank you, Maud. Good morning, everybody. As Mort have introduced me earlier, I'm Dimakacho Mulusi, the chairperson of Bahamutibi LGBTI, the founder and the project lead manager. I'm with my colleague is Tabisho Hadebe. At first, as Bahamutibi LGBTI, we were only focusing on the LGBTI community. But we have realized that the people who are living with disability can't access the facilities, and at many times the justice they can't face the justice is not served for to them. So there was an incident at Sikkim village on the 3rd of February 2022, where the elder woman who is living with disability was raped, a 73-year-old woman. So as the Bahamutibi LGBTI, we supported and advocated the case from day one. And fortunately, the perpetrator was denied bail and the case was transferred to the Regional Court of Taung. On the 3rd of November, it was the final date of the case where we were able to mobilize other GBV, CBO within town, because we can't work GBV as alone. We must work together to fight the GBV. So the case went on, and then on the 7th of November, it was on Monday, it's when the survivor was telling a statement. It was very touching, but what we have observed is that we are so humbled to have the magistrate like Honorable Mr. Buti Zulu. The magistrate gave us another day, which was the 8th of November. We were happy about the outcome of the case, because the perpetrator was sentenced life imprisonment. And it was it is a lesson to all the perpetrators that don't ever take advantage for our vulnerable people, be it people living with disability. So as Bahamutibi, we fully support people living with disability because they can't access services and the justice, they don't access justice. So now we say enough is enough. As Bahamutibi, we recommend that other CBOs, we must not focus only, we must not only work, we must also work outside the box, not just focusing on what we are doing. Whereas there are vulnerable groups who are suffering or who are experiencing GBV, we must take action and fight and come together and hold hands and make sure that justice is served, especially for our people living with disability. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dimakato. That is powerful. And, definitely the forming alliances and working as a collective instead of in different silos will definitely give us progress. And I think that the greatest thing that I heard is, which is not something that we see often, unfortunately, is that the magistrate who's working on the specific case is really, really giving the justice that we would love to see in all cases. And I encourage that you do continue to support the communities, whichever community, and we also encourage for you to continue to push out what we are seeing in the court system. And I think that this would also lay a foundation for other magistrates in different areas to set a precedent, to hold people accountable, to hold perpetrators accountable. And I think that would also, to some extent, your involvement, your support would play a very big factor in that. So we do thank you for that. And we also thank you for the words of saying that we can't work alone. This is a very big challenge that we have, and we cannot fight this pandemic on our own in our individual communities. If we work as a collective, we will get bigger impact. So thank you so much, Bagamu TV, and continue with the amazing work. And we will continue to monitor the case with you, and also use that as an advocacy tool to inform other courts on how the cases should be dealt.
Most definitely, Maud. As you said, we cannot fight this alone. We are free, but we're still not yet free. We've got injustices and hurdles, basically, that we are still facing in order to achieve the main goal of being free, being inclusive, maybe people living with disability, maybe as an LGBTI person, you understand, it's still a very long way, but with alliances, with us holding hands together and joining the fight and not turning a blind eye, because we've got people that turn a blind eye on such issues. I recently had a client here within my office who was who had a disability or a hearing problem, I could say. Nobody was able to understand or able to hear. Everybody just kept on pushing him to the next office, to the next office, to the next office, up until he ended up in my office. Luckily, as much as I'm not educated yet, but I could slowly write down and listen, speak to him, as Sanele said, that when you're speaking to somebody who's deaf, look at them straight so they can understand what you're saying. Be slow in terms of speaking. Don't speak fast where they're unable to read your lips. So just have patience with them, understand them. And then especially within this side of Northwest, we are still in a village. I could say we've got a lot of villages where they still are deprived a bit of information. So I would like, if possibly, a merger or some sort of partnership with KZN Deaf Association in terms of maybe coming this side and also having to assist us in terms of sensitization with our Justice Department, our subs, and also just the community at large, teaching them maybe even the basic stuffs of just how to say your name, how to greet, and all those stuff.
That is incredible, and I think that here is already an alliance and within the CBOs that the community-based organizations that we're working with, that we should definitely look into and seeing how we can assist in facilitating the process and support there. But I think that is great, and also there's a comment in the chat function that is echoing your sentiments and your reflections, so in terms of the LGBTIQA plus community, also still facing huge challenges and huge barriers. And I think that also speaks to other vulnerable groups. And it also speaks about the high rate of intimate partner violence, and it also brings about different challenges because these challenges are also intersectional. So I think that looking at it on a broader sphere rather than individually is where we may be able to find broader impact. So thank you so much for Bagamu TV, and and to also and to continue to support that case as mentioned. And I see another comment from Karabo. It is true when they say your story can change other people's life and perspective. I'm really inspired and want to learn sign language as they really love being around me, but I find it difficult to communicate. So I think that is a reflection in terms of Sanele's story. So I think that let's continue to inspire and let's continue to do a great work. We will definitely, find a way of combating gender-based violence and femicide. So I think we are going to move to our next speaker, our next panelist, who is Tato Mputi. So People with disabilities have the same rights to sexuality, intimacy, and self-determination as people without disabilities. Unfortunately, these rights are often not respected or included in policy and practice. This can lead to discrimination and exclusion from sexual and reproductive health services, as well as a lack of education and information about sexuality and disability. Inclusion of people with disabilities in all aspects of life is essential to ensuring their rights are respected. This includes ensuring that sexual and reproductive health rights are accessible and inclusive of all people. Education and awareness raising about sexuality of people with disabilities is also important to change attitudes and create inclusive environment. So, Tato, I think that when we introduced you, we provided a bio, and I would like for you to speak about what inspired you to become an advocate for persons with disabilities, and in that, what do you think is the most important thing for people to understand about the intersection between disability and sexuality, and the unique challenges that persons with disabilities face regarding sexuality, and also how we can break barriers and stigma around disability and sexuality to create a more inclusive society, and also what are your goals for the future in terms of reducing stigma and increasing inclusion for all persons, especially persons with disabilities, and what kind of policies would you like to see in place to better support this process? I know that's a big nutshell, but yeah, if you could speak on that. Thank you, Tato. Over to you.
All right. Thank you so much, Modi, and thank you for this opportunity to engage on this matter. So I am an advocate for persons with disabilities because I am a person with disability myself. And part of the reason why I started, being actively involved is because many a times than not, especially being in the spaces of activism, you would find that issues of disabilities would be parked for later and sometimes end up not being addressed. So because I needed the change and I understood the affecting my livelihood. I then ended up starting to advocate intentionally on issues of disability to also create an awareness and make people understand that persons with disabilities exist and they also matter. And therefore, in our different organizing, we need to be cognizant of the fact that persons with disabilities will be a big part of everything that we are doing. And also, I think it is important for us to understand that people with disabilities are not just a homogeneous group, right? We are very diverse and therefore we have diverse experiences. I may be a young Black woman with a disability, but I could be identifying as a member of the LGBTI. I can be unemployed. I can be uneducated. I may be, so there are different intersections and there are different layers to how each person gets to navigate their life as a person with disability. And when it comes to issues of sexuality and sexual health, we find that it is very difficult for persons with disabilities or young women with disabilities to get access to this kind of services because one of the belief that people with disabilities, or in this instance, women with disabilities, should not be engaging in any sexual activities. You should not want to access a service such as termination of pregnancy. What they are not realizing is that when women with disabilities want to access things like contraceptives, they're empowered and they understand that they are not trying to have unintended pregnancies, but the kind of attitude that they are met with in the healthcare service continues to perpetuate the culture and the idea of ableism for women with disabilities in accessing these. Am I still audible?
Yes, we can still hear you, Tato.
All right.
Can you hear us?
Sorry, because my network is buffering. Yes, I can hear. Yes. So for us to create an inclusive society, we need to be one intentional about how we work. For instance, if we're going to be having conversations around gender-based violence and femicide, why is it we have a representation of persons with disabilities in their diversity to be part of these conversations, to be part of these resolutions? Because I believe that persons with disabilities equally have solutions to the many challenges that they are faced with, because they have the experience, they live this life, and they have they have the knowledge on how to navigate the different spaces. So when we are organizing, we need to and ensure that there is a representation of each, and not only having persons with disabilities in the different conversations to tick boxes, but we are creating spaces where they can be free, have freedom to voice out, and without fear of being judged or anything of that nature. So some of my goals in terms of nation that is faced by persons with disability is to create inclusive spaces, working with both those with disabilities, to sensitize, to educate, and to have the both parties in the same spaces. I usually speak about inclusive education to say it is no use for us to have separate schools, whereas we can try find ways in which we can integrate children with disabilities to grow up in an environment where all the children are going to school together. Because I believe that if children grow up seeing persons with disabilities, then we would not be having incidences of adults who want to take your crutches, for instance, adults wanting to push your wheelchair, or those kind of things. So I think start tackling the education system and ensuring that sign language is one of the things that are taught within our schooling systems, so that we don't find ourselves with situations where, as a person with a disability, you cannot report at a police station because no one understands sign language, and then you are moved from pillar to post, or moved from one institution to another, which when you think of why people with disabilities are not reporting cases of gender-based violence, or are not reporting, it is because our institutions sector is not ready to cater to the needs of persons with disabilities. And we also invite the private sector to fund the work around disability justice and disability inclusion, and for them to be intentional about hiring persons with disabilities within their institution. And we see that a lot of persons with disabilities who are hired into organizations, or who are hired within big corporate, just there to be a poster girl or poster boy, but they are not fully integrated within the ecosystem. And we see that a lot of persons with disabilities are being put on leadership, one leadership to the other, but they are not being absorbed, and that is problematic, right? And then when we look at job advertisements, they would be telling us that as a person with disability, you are encouraged to apply, but the reality is you are a title who has not had formal education, and you do not possess the kind of qualifications that are required for that position, you are discouraged from applying. So we really need to be cognizant of the fact that different persons with disabilities are not starting on an equal footing with those that do not have. When it comes to issues around policies, we need to ensure that consultations takes place, and we are not only consulting to tick a box, but consult, integrate, and then then implement these kind of policies. With the National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence and Femicide, not a lot of persons with disability feel that the policy speaks to them. 7 pillars, and in those 7 pillars, how are we ensuring that these pillars speak to the experiences of a Tato who lives in the rural community, who does not have access to internet, who does not have access to education? We need to we need to also understand that not all interventions can work for all persons with disabilities. So thank you for this opportunity, and if there are any questions, I'm open to responding.
Thank you so much, Tato, and thank you for also that well-rounded, vision in terms of what you would like to see, and also the barriers that you are already seeing, and that other community members are also encountering. And I think that the inclusion and intentional inclusion, and inclusion from the onset, as you've mentioned, not to make it a tick box exercise, and including the community themselves from the onset, from the beginning process, to ensure that their views are heard, to ensure that their circumstances are considered. As you've mentioned, that the community itself is very diverse, and it should not be bundled up as one community. It should be the intersectionality should be considered. And I think that having a well-rounded inclusion process from the beginning until implementation, and also looking at the lessons through that implementation process, with the community being at the forefront and providing their input in this process. And also, you mentioned and touched on something that has been mentioned by our other panelists about employment opportunities. So instead of being deterred from applying and successfully getting job opportunities, companies, organizations, and departments should really endeavor to be more progressive and more inclusive in these processes. And thank you so much for sharing your insights in terms of that and your perspective. And please continue to be the great advocate for many people who are the Tatos and are the Saneles, and also the organizations themselves should continue to push the important work that is much needed. So thank you so much, Tato. And again, I'm just going to look at the comment section, and we're getting a lot of echoing in terms of what you've shared, Tato. And I think that thank you so much for sharing that perspective, which also opens eyes to organizations who are watching, to departments who are part of this conversations, on how they can, progressively and proactively engage in intentional inclusivity in education, in policy, and not at the end, but rather at the beginning of the process. So with that being shared, and we're getting very powerful echoes, so thank you so much to our incredible panelists. Moving over to our final panelists, I'm not sure if they are in the session or if they are having some connection issues, but just let me check. Let me just check on our final panelist, who is Nosintu Kimeli, and who is the founder of Abanembongo, Persons with Disability Organization in Kamakwe, and an activist of the hashtag Total Shutdown in Eastern Cape, and also the Eastern Cape Climate Crisis activist. So Nosintu, if you are on the call, over to you to share about the work that you're doing, and also feel free to reflect on what the other panelists have shared in our session. Okay, I think that Nusintu may be experiencing some connection issues, but when she can, then she'll just join our conversation. And as a broad question or a broad note that any one of our panelists can really touch on, access to information has been something that all panelists have touched on, and there are many ways that persons with disability can access information about gender-based violence and femicide. And one way is through online resources, and of course that also comes with its own barriers. However, we live in a digital world right now, so for those who have access to the internet, there are websites and social media platforms where they'll be able to gain much needed information, and not only for persons with disability, the broader community. So we've shared about how you can learn sign, and also there's basic signing that is available on online platforms. Another way is to contact the local or national helpline for support and information. Additionally, there are often GBVF support groups available in many communities, and these groups can provide valuable information and support to the community, especially for those who have experienced gender-based violence and femicide or who are allies to the movement. So what happens when info is not easily accessible? We have heard a bit of reflection in terms of that it hinders the community on a personal level, on a professional level, and also sometimes it hinders, future prospects in some situations. But I just would like to throw this to our panelists to talk about where people can access information. Do you know of any websites that you can share? We can share it in our comment section. That would be a platform for community members to access crucial information on being an ally and supporting the community, and also if they seek any support in terms of gender-based violence response efforts. So over to you, any one of our panelists. This is an open question and we can have a broader discussion about that. So while we reflect on that, I'll just touch on the comment section until one of our panelists is going to tackle this. We have reflections in terms of the response in terms of investigations must be done in companies, organizations, and departments to learn on a number of people living with disabilities if surely they are employed, and encourage employment. So that is from Portia, and we definitely support that, and that would pave the way to accessibility to employment opportunities. And Buni mentioned that Sanela, I'm taking your lessons very seriously for use as well in my facilitation. It is useful to hear the education again. Ke a leboga. Go lebogile rena, Buni. And also from the and GBVF collective, we also have to ensure that our planning is automatic in inclusion of people with disabilities and the LGBTIQ plus communities. We can't wait for an awareness month to involve them, and we must force ourselves to integrate them into our strategic activities and ask for their involvement. And that is a powerful comment, which I think that we should all reflect on as organizations, as humanitarians, and and any state department, or as a person individually, even if you're working in the corporate sector, think about this and reflect on that, what is shared, that let us be intentional from the onset in our intention for inclusivity, and also for equality, and we are and provide and let everybody have that right to enjoy the human rights which they are afforded by our Supreme Constitution. So I'm not sure if I'm missing any comments, but while I look at that, can we please also back to our panelists in terms of that reflection, and that can also be a final reflection on this session itself. And yeah, before we close our session, I will continue to look out into the comment section. So over to you, panelists.
Maud, I know
Wait,
one
wait,
of
wait,
the
wait. Oh, you put it.
one
Okay.
of the organizations spoke about, disability and deafness sensitization, and I think you alluded to it. With technology, we've bridge the gap even between provinces, so people can link up with us. We can always look at some online sessions that they could maybe facilitate, because you're talking about justice and police in your province that need that kind of sensitization. So if you already have those contacts and people, there's a willingness, even if it's a different province, we can always look at doing something online in terms of sensitization.
Thanks very much for that. I think I will share the same sentiments throughout. If let me just put it this way, as to say, within organizations, since we've already started something, we might as well just combine together, do something, especially with technology. We are able to host online sensitizations within different departments, the DOJ, the subs, health also, because health is a big issue that also contributes in most of, whether it's LGBTI or it's people living with disability. Health is the most important sector that needs, I think, sensitization, in terms of we are unable to get the assistance or the help that we need, because as a person living with disability, you're unable to express yourself fully, where he or she sisters will be able to assist you fully and give you the full accurate information. The same as SAPS. Not many police officers are still equipped with sign language, or still are able to handle cases of sign language, where you need to express yourself and then they need to fully understand in order for you to get the help that you need. So such matters we still need to do across the country. I think it's not only between Northwest and KZN, but as a country as a whole. If we can just combine and say, let's hold hands together. If there's organizations in Gauteng, in Eastern Cape, Western Cape, wherever, let's combine, let's do this. We know that we'll have a certain month, maybe within South Africa, that we're going to have awareness to say, this certain week we're focusing on that, this certain week we're focusing on that, especially within the LGBTI and the disability, because we do have members within the queer community that are disabled, that are going through stuff, and they are unable, first of all, because they are living with a disability, they are unable to express themselves fully. And then because they are also persons of queer, where also that becomes a problem on its own, where, especially within the rural areas, it's still shunned about that you are a person of from the queer peoples, you understand? So certain things like that, I think now it's time, it's 2022, so we definitely need to do something about that.
Definitely. Great said, great said. And I think as a reflection, I think we're all speaking in the terms of allyship is important, collaboration is important, and using platforms to make sure that the information that we have within different organizations are collaborated and taken through and spread out to communities. And this is much needed. So Soul City Institute would definitely be honored.
Sorry, Maud.
Oh, yes, sorry.
May I come in there?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
Well, in our outreach, teaching sign language to the rapid response teams, in the morning, I would see, upon the first day they enter my class, I see how nervous they are. But once that attitudinal apprehensiveness, once we overcome that, people by the end of the day are actually so excited to just use their hands to communicate. So I really think there's a systemic approach that we need to implement. What we do is we start with the one-hand finger spelling alphabet, then we continue, and by the end of the day, people understand what type of language South African Sign Language is. So I would like to appeal to people that there is a definitions app downloadable via Google Play. It has an extensive amount of words in their list. So download the app and get signing.
Ah, that's incredible. There we go. There's an app that is downloadable, and I think that we will try to get a link for it. And yeah, please feel free to reach out to any organization with KZNDA. Ourselves to get that link, but or the name of the platform. So thank you, Sanele, for sharing that information, and I think we can definitely get much needed information in our own spaces, in the comfort of our own home. So definitely please reach out, please take the necessary steps and be proactive and intentional in in being an ally in all aspects, not only during specific times of the year or specific moments. Be a full on and an intentional ally to the community. And with that, before I give over, I know we have like less than a minute left, but then I would like to highlight that as the End GBVF collective, we want to invite organizations to join in the implementation and adoption of National Strategic Plan on Gender-Based Violence in order to put in practice intersectionality. And we have a call for the next 100-day challenges resuming in January that we would like to encourage everybody to participate in. So whether you're an organization or in your individual capacity, this is a challenge which I think we all should be proactive and be excited in participating in, to ensure that we do practice what we preach in terms of inclusion and also equality, and also forming allyships. So I would like to hand over to the panelists for final quick remarks, and before we close the session officially. And I really appreciate everybody within our panelists for joining and for sharing your perspective and your great insight. This was very informative, and I wish we had like 3 hours to break 4 hours rather, to break everything down, because this has been very insightful for myself, and I think it also informs future engagements that we can have, also to challenge ourselves and making sure that we practice what we preach in terms of intersectionalities. So I mean inclusion and affording justice to everyone. So over to you, panelists. We will start with, I think we've lost Tato. So yeah, I think Bakama TV, KZNDA, if there's anything that you'd like to add in before we close the session.
Okay, since I went first, I will go first in the rounding off as well. Again, thank you so much for this opportunity. You know, the more we're listening to the LGBTQI, you can draw so many parallels with, you know, just the basis of discrimination. And I think the way we wire just by human nature is we always look at the us and the them. We always look at all the issues or criteria that we want to distance ourselves. But actually, if you unpack it and change your focus, we're more similar than different. It's just, I think sometimes people are just intimidated by, you know, the unknown territory. Like if I engage with a deaf person, I don't want to do something offensive. I don't know how to sign. But if you just allay those fears and just walk towards them rather than away from them. And when we do these presentations, I always say to the deaf audience, let's change our focus, because, you know, we're not passive receivers, we're active, we're intelligent. So if you change your focus and your perspective is from a positive standpoint rather than a negative, yes, we are all trying to build this bridge where ideally one day everybody signs and you have access to interpreters. But while we're trying to build this bridge, how do we get to the other side? So we can spend the bulk of our time saying we need interpreters, we need services in translations, we need full access. But while we're building those bridges to get to the other side, there are ways that we can fill those gaps. And I think the fact that we all network together is going to help us get to the other side even quicker. sadly, we get more, we are inundated with calls and invites during this time of the year because it's International Day of Persons with Disabilities. And it's kind of like an afterthought. But, again, we need to look at the spaces that we fill because we deaf people are not commodities. We can't just send X number of people just because you want to tick a box. So if people have these days that they're commemorating for people with disabilities, look at sustainable projects, look at where your funding goes. They shouldn't be an afterthought that just happens at this time of the year. So we're happy to network, but again, we want to be in the spaces where we're going to effect that kind of change. And the slogan, nothing about us without us, is always at the forefront. Thank you so much for this opportunity. That's all for me.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. And thank you to KZNDA for, oh yes, Sanele.
Oh, yes. What I wanted to say, I'd like to teach you some sign language. So please do what I do. This sign, thank you, thank you, thank you. And the second sign, nice to meet. So you do it with one hand, nice to meet you.
To meet you.
Awesome, awesome, everyone. I love you. That's the sign for I love you. That's the I, the L, and the Y put together.
I have nothing further to add. I think Upasana and Sanele have voiced my sentiments. Just to say that I look forward to further consultations like this because I think it's very, very important that we link up, we network, and doing it virtually like this. I think COVID has taught us one thing is that we can continue to network virtually now as opposed to face, and it also bridges the gap in terms of, the barrier in terms of transport and costing and etc. So thank you so much, Soul City, for this initiative, and to all the panelists. It was lovely to meet you, and really looking forward to. We have put our emails on the chat, and I'm sure Soul City will share it with you. We will share the link to Definitions app, and looking forward to further consultation and discussions. Thank you. Thank you.
And to our interpreters.
And to our
Excellent
interpreters.
interpreters.
Thank you.
Petri
you.
and Gilad, yeah.
Thank you so much.
Awesome, everyone.
Thanks very much. I think we all share the very same sentiments. Let's come together. I was speaking last night, actually, while it was load shedding, speaking to one of my mentors, and we were saying, actually, in order to enrich our lives or to educate the next person, it's basically all about just push and pull. We pull up one who goes up, the one who's on top drags comes back and picks up the other one. The very same, it becomes a step ladder. So in order for us to bridge those gaps, in order to get across and to be the same place, I think it's basically if we are able to just teach one to swim, the one who's already swam and was on the other side will be able to push the boat back, or to create something that will go across the bridge and just get the other one up until we are all basically in one space. That's it. Further more from there, I think right now, because it's festive season, not much is going to be done. Everyone is busy with festive mood. So when we come back in Jan, I think let's go back to the drawing board and let's restructure our plans and let's do inclusion. If the Deaf Association have got a project or something, let them include the queer people organizations in KZN, in Gauteng, in wherever. As long as we start communicating networks and we are doing like that, then I think by the end of the year or come 2026 or whichever year it is, we will be free. The barriers would be broken down. The walls will be broken down. We will become one united, as we're always saying, we are a united South Africa. So if you could just break down those walls and those stereotypes and that afraidness, where we are closing ourselves into one, as they said, the unknown territory. If we can just shy away from that, and then I think we could go very far. What my manager once said, if you don't know how to address me, rather come and ask me and just apologize that I don't mean to offend you, but how do I pronounce your name or how do I say this? Just that thing, it will not hurt. I will also be able to, and I'll be happy to actually teach you how to say my name, how to speak to me, how to address me. You understand? Simple such things as mannerisms, I think it will go very far. I don't know if my colleague would like to say something.
No, thank you very much for this opportunity. I will express myself from what I learned from Zanele.
Thank you so much to everyone, and we really do appreciate our panelists. We appreciate you for joining and participating through the comment section. And yeah, please do reach out through our website, and thank you to our interpreters as well. And let's continue this conversation on different platforms. And this recording will also be accessible, so please feel free to share and also feel free to access and use this as to engage and build on the conversation. Have a lovely Friday further, and and I think that's all from us. Thank you so much, everyone.